before the first Christmas. It had been just a little plot of land rising up out of the great waters. But as the waters receded and the land grew in size, people came there to live and claimed it as their country. There were hundreds of dark years when the people worshipped heathen gods, and many of the traditions and superstitions from the heathen world lingered on when Sweden became a Christian country. Many of the old traditions were passed down from generation to generation. The story of St. Lucia was passed down this way, and there are many legends about her. Christmas began on the 13th of December, when all of Sweden celebrated the Festival of Lights. On that morning, the oldest daughter in the household got up long before daybreak to prepare coffee to serve to the rest of the family in bed. It was only to the oldest girl that this honored tradition belonged. To fathom its beauty, one must see and experience it. We must first bear in mind the thick darkness of the time of year and the cold that gripped Sweden. What fun to make ready and finally to light the 7 tall tapers of the candle crown and place it on one's hair. Then to pick up the coffee tray on which had been placed the best embroidered white cloth, coffee cups for all the members of the family, the fat Lucia cat buns made especially for this morning, and finally the bright copper coffee pot filled with steaming coffee. It was a long, slow walk from room to room, but what a picture the Lucia bride made. Her face was so sweet and young, her golden hair falling softly over her shoulders, and her eyes shining as brightly as the candles in her crown. The song she sang as she walked from bed to bed, waking each person to serve him coffee, wove a spell in tune and words. Night walks with heavy tread in cottage and garden. Shadows hover over the land deserted by the sun. And in our dark house, Santa Lucia walks. Santa Lucia, Santa Lucia. The song had many verses, and in Swedish it was beautiful. It proclaimed that soon the darkness would flee, and the sun would step out of the rosy sky, and all would be well. And those who belonged to Sweden echoed her song in their hearts. The tradition is a very, very old one, but its glow has never faded. The candles shine just as brightly year after year, and the story of St. Lucia is as pure and fresh as the long white flowing gown the Lucia bride wears on that special morning. The first Lucia was not a Swedish girl. She was born in Sicily, where certain events took place in the year 304. You wonder how the world looked way back then. It must have been very different. One thing was the same, though, and that was love. Love was much a part of the story of Lucia, with whose festival in December the Christmas season begins. Lucia was very, very beautiful. Much of her beauty was in her eyes, which reflected the soul, sweet and pure. To look into them was like seeing a bit of God's beautiful heaven. Eternal things seemed to fill her mind, and she lived to do good deeds, especially for those in need. As the custom was in those days, her father gave her in marriage to a young man of the village. Just at that time, Lucia's mother was taken very ill, and Lucia, who adored her, sat by her side as death seemed about to claim her. Lucia prayed for her mother's recovery, pleading with God, and promising that if he restored her mother's health, she would give all her worldly possessions to the oppressed Christians. Her prayers were answered, and when her mother's health was restored, Lucia knew it was a miracle, and that she must keep her promise to God. So she gave all that her father had given her as a dowry, every bit of it, to the poor. And her husband received nothing in worldly goods when he took his lovely young bride. He, not understanding her deed, became very, very angry. He accused Lucia of witchcraft, for he believed that no one in her right mind could have done what she did. Lucia was tried and burned at the stake. But, the legend says, as her limp body crumbled under the cruel fire, The whole village was illuminated by a brilliant light, and the heartless, ignorant people became frightened because they suddenly understood that the girl was a saint and not a witch, and that it was goodness which had prompted her to give her wealth to the needy. Thereafter, she was seen again and again in many different places where people needed help, of hope and peace and light in the darkest season of the year. The celebration in her memory is a festive occasion when hundreds of Swedish girls compete for the honor of being selected as this year's outstanding Lucia bride. The tradition has spilled over to the Swedish American churches and the organizations, and on the 13th of December, the most beautiful girl is chosen by the people to march down the aisle with a lighted candle crown on her lovely head in a special service symbolizing new light and joy for our world.
This concludes the program part of our afternoon. Please join us for coffee and cookies in the gallery across the hall. And if you'd like to take pictures, now is your opportunity. Thank you so much for coming.
The annual Lucia Fest coming to Jamestown yesterday. The Lucia Court made its entrance at Jamestown Community College. Swedish students at the college honoring the story of Santa Lucia, Camelia Bjornberg portraying the woman that gave her wealth to the poor. And that's our report for this Monday. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow.